Well, good morning. How you guys doing today? Good. It's good to see you here. It is good to be with you all, and welcome to the second week of public services of One Church. And last week was wonderful and awesome, and I'm excited that we were here for week 2. And I'm excited for those of you who came last week, and you're here again, which means we didn't scare you away, which is awesome. And for you guys who are first-time guests today, welcome. So glad you chose to spend some time with us this morning. And my goal right now is to not scare you away. You'll come back again sometime. But we're excited that you're here. My name is Stephenson. I have the privilege of being the lead pastor here at One Church. And One Church was started with the mission to work as one to help people follow Jesus. And our Sunday morning gatherings like we're at today is a huge part of that. And something we'll do every single week when we gather here together is we'll have a time of teaching where we explore more of who God is and how that impacts our lives, both now and in the past and moving forward as well. And today we're continuing this series that we call Together is Better. And we're exploring this truth that God designed life to work better together. First, better with Him as a part of our lives. We talked last week how a life with Jesus is much better than a life without Jesus. If you couldn't make it last week, it's okay. We record all of our messages. You can simply just go to YouTube and search One Church Pittsburgh, and you can catch up on any messages that we have going on from here on out, moving forward. But today, we're going to continue this series by looking at how God has called us to a life that's much bigger than ourselves. Now, I don't know if you ever had these moments, but do you ever have a moment where you realize, man, life is so much bigger than me? Like, something happens with an experience or something takes place, and you just realize, okay, life is not just about me. Life is much bigger than that. There's other people. There's other purposes. There's so much stuff going on around me, and life is bigger than me. Now, something that's true about myself, just to be honest with you guys, is I tend to be a little selfish in life. Anyone relate with that? Good. A few people. The ones who didn't raise their hand, we know the truth. It's okay. No, I'm just kidding. But I can be very selfish. I look out for my own comforts. I look out for my own desires. Like, for instance, and my wife can confirm this, I tend to not ever want to give the first bite or the last bite of my meal. In between, I'll share. But there's just something like sacred to me about the first bite or the last bite, especially when, and it's the season, they're open now, Dairy Queen opens for the first time. I've had had to teach a lot of our Wisconsinites. We had some people from Wisconsin move here, like Scott, who just heard from. They moved from Wisconsin to help us get this church started. But in Wisconsin, all the Dairy Queens there, they're open all year round. And I'm thinking, wow, these people never suffered the travesty of Dairy Queen shutting down for the winter. But they've also never experienced the joy of Dairy Queen opening in the spring, which is awesome. If you guys are from this area, you guys understand. And so, there's one time that we had Dairy Queen, and I got Old Faithful, which is a cookie dough blizzard. That's my go-to. And we're driving in the car, and Danielle's holding all the ice cream, and she takes the first bite of my blizzard. And I looked over, I'm like, what did you just do? Like, this was a horrible, difficult moment in our marriage at that time. Like, we had it out. We fought. We had a good conversation afterwards. We love Jesus. We love each other. We're good now. But it was a big deal. That was a rocky part in our lives together. But just so you know, I tend to be selfish sometimes. But thankfully, there are moments in my life, in all of our lives, that remind me and teach me that life is so much bigger than myself, like having children. Because something I've learned over the past almost 6 years of being a parent, there's no one more selfish on this planet than children. Now, that's not a bad thing, but it's true. Like, I think I just heard some parents go, amen, because that's just the truth sometimes. That's what happens. They're born, they need fed, they need diapers changed. I mean, all these things take place. They are reliant on us to keep them surviving, to keep them growing, and to teach them how to live life. But because of that, they just suck the life out of you sometimes. And so having children has taught me that life is not about me. In fact, it's almost always about them crazy kids. Because what happens is they show me how selfish I am. And what happens is they need, the diapers changed, the food, all that kind of stuff. They need to learn how to communicate. Trying to figure out how to communicate with my 18-month-old who just screams and grunts at me. And also, if he really wants something, he just yells, "Dada!" What do you want me to do with that, Kobe? I don't know, man. You're just screaming my name. But they need help with that stuff. They mooch off your food more than your wife does, especially your cookie dough blizzards. Like, lots of things take place with kids. But most importantly, these kids have shown me how selfish I can be. Like when our youngest Kobe still wakes up in the middle of the night like he did like 4 times last night. And when that happens, I automatically start formulating in my head why my sleep is way more important than my wife Danielle's sleep. And I start, figuring out an argument of why it's her turn to get up with him for like the 7th time in a row. Because I'm thinking out for myself. That's what I do. Or when I get home from a long day and the kids just want to play and I just want to take a break and sit and do nothing, I realize in those moments my tendencies are to look at myself before I look at other people. It shows me that when they're in need, which is a lot and rightfully so because they're children, it reminds me of where my heart is. And a lot of times it shows me that life is not about me. Life is bigger than me, and I need to keep learning and living that. And I think that is something we all need in our lives. We need reminders, moments, and experiences that shows us that life is much bigger than ourselves. Oftentimes, we can get really focused on ourselves and we miss the part where we can be part of something much bigger, the life that God's actually calling us to live, because he calls us to something much bigger than ourselves. And honestly, I think that's why God designed our lives to have things like marriage and children, death, tragedy, triumph. It's why we work. It's why we have roommates. It's why we have siblings and families. It's why we do life with other people in it and not by ourselves. It shows us that it's not just about us, that life is meant to be together, and actually in that, together is better. So today's goal, though, is not to make us all feel guilty because all of us are selfish here, because we all are. That's the truth. But today's goal is not to make us feel guilty about that, but rather today's goal is to remind us that there is a life that God is calling us to that is way better than the one that we live on our own sometimes. A life that is together with him, which we talked about last week, but also better together with other people, even in this moment here in this room together. This is exactly why we started this church, and we're starting this series with the church called Together is Better, because we think it's that important. I spent months thinking about how we're going to start our teaching series at One Church, and this was so clear to me that we start with this concept, this truth, that together is better, because sometimes we miss why God sent Jesus. First and foremost, he sent Jesus to come and rescue and restore us back to a relationship with God. If we put our faith in Jesus, when we die, we spend eternity with God in heaven. That's the basics of the foundation of the belief of Christianity, that God sent Jesus to rescue us, to restore us. When we put our faith into him, we put our trust into him, we repent from our old lives and turn to a new life following him, that we are rescued, that we are restored, and we get to spend eternity with God in heaven. Now, this is just my expectation, but I think that's going to be amazing. Heaven's going to be awesome. But if it's such a big deal, why doesn't God, when we put our trust into Jesus, put our faith into him, why doesn't he just suck us up right there and bring us to heaven? Just be done with it. It's good. We trust him. Well, why waste any more time here on this planet? Because it'd be so much easier that way. Well, I think that's why we have to pay attention, that there's more to it than just that. That not only does he come to rescue us and restore us, but he calls us to a life that's much bigger than that. It doesn't just work where you put your trust into God, you put your faith into Jesus, turn from your old life, go to your new, and then we're sucked up, going to heaven, good times. It doesn't work that way. You see, what if God sent Jesus not just to rescue us, but also to call us to something bigger in our lives? And that's what I want to wrestle with together this morning. You see, Jesus spent his ministry teaching and showing people this fact, this truth. Jesus spent a little over 33 years on this planet. In the first 30 or so, what he did was he lived amongst the people. He grew up. He had parents. He worked. He laughed. He ate. He had friendships. He knew the culture. He lived into that world. He knew everything there was to know about that culture where he lived. But then it was time to start the work that God had sent him to do. He started that ministry. And what he did was to show the world that God loves us and came to rescue and restore us. And so Jesus went around that area teaching things like love God with everything that you have and love your neighbor as yourself. And he taught about God's truth, about grace and forgiveness and love and what it looks like to be merciful and generous to others. Jesus is teaching us what life should and can look like when we put our trust in the God and we follow him in everything that we do. Jesus spent his ministry teaching and showing people that. Jesus also spent his major part of his ministry investing into some other people. In fact, we know them as the 12 apostles. These 12 guys, they were his closest friends, and these are the guys that Jesus chose to pour his life into. He spent almost all of his time in his ministry with them, teaching them, showing them, encouraging them, challenging them, and sending them off to do ministry on their own. He invested in them to make them the heroes that would go help start the church that now we still exist in today, thousands of years later. The problem was, though, these 12 guys, these apostles, just like every other human being on this planet, they had a tendency to get a little too focused on themselves. They tended to get a little too selfish, and they focused on their own desires and their own comforts, and they often would miss the point. But Jesus loved them so much, like he does us, and continually and patiently kept showing them and teaching them what a life God called them to live. And he actually did this right up until his death. And this is where I want us to look today, at Jesus reminding his apostles that life was so much bigger than them. We're going to look at the book of John in the Bible. And if you have your Bibles or you have an app on your phone, use that, but we'll also have the verses here on the screen. But we're going to look at the book of John, and John was one of these 12 apostles. He was one of Jesus' closest friends, the ones that Jesus invested in, and he wrote down his experience and that group's experience with Jesus in what we now have, which is called the Gospel of John. Now, it would have been really easy for John, as he's writing this, to kind of paint himself and even his friends in a very favoring light. Like, you know what, we did good, we hung out with Jesus, he performed all these miracles, life was awesome with Jesus. But thankfully, John was brutally honest about himself and about his fellow followers of Jesus. And we see that in John's writings about Jesus, and we come up to this point where Jesus, in John's telling of his life with Jesus, where Jesus has been telling and reminding his apostles, his closest friends, listen, I'm going to die soon. I'm going to leave you. My time is coming. And he reminded them over and over and over again. This is why we celebrate Easter in a week, to remember this time. And those apostles would either do one of two things. They just brushed it aside like it was no big deal, or they simply ignored it and just didn't believe it. And so we get to this point where he's telling them that, and they simply don't believe him. And then we have this story take place in John 13, starting in verse 1. It says this, John writes this about this experience. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he'd come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and head as well. Jesus answered, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you, for he knew who was going to betray him. And that was why he said not everyone was clean. So here we pick up this story that John is sharing about their experience with Jesus. And Jesus is a few hours from his death. Shortly after this, he's going to get arrested. He's going to be put on trial. He's going to be beaten. He's going to be whipped. And he's going to be hung on the cross, nailed to the cross, where he will die for the saving of the entire world, the rescuing of our lives. And so they're coming up to it, and he was about to have one more Passover meal with his closest friends. Now, the Passover meal was just a really amazing and cool tradition, just Jewish tradition, where they would gather and eat a meal that symbolized God's rescue of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. And it reminded them that God promised a once and for all rescuer that was eventually going to come and rescue them for all time. And that rescuer happened to be Jesus. So every year, the Jewish people would gather for this festival, for this tradition, and have this meal together amongst their closest family and friends. And so they get to where they're about to have this meal together, and John writes that as the meal was being served, Jesus got up, wrapped the towel around his waist, and poured water into a bowl, and started washing his disciples' feet. Now, this is just this crazy scene that starts playing out. They're about to have a meal, and Jesus starts washing the feet of his closest friends. But this is really a traditional thing that took place in that culture. Because in that culture, everyone walked around everywhere. They didn't have nice cars. Unless you were really wealthy and had like a horse and carriage and things like that, you walked to wherever you were going. And the footwear that they had back then were sandals. And they weren't like sandals that covered your entire feet. They were more for protection of the bottom of your foot. So the top of it, your ankles, your top of your feet, your toes, so more of that was exposed. And they also didn't have nice paved sidewalks or roads too. It was stone and it was dirt and it was messy roads. And also, animals would walk amongst the roads because people were farmers and they'd bring their livestock or whatever it may be, would travel the roads as well. And you guys kind of know what animals do every once in a while. And those animals would just do their thing right there on the roads as they're walking. And so there is dirt, it's mud, there's animal poop everywhere. It's just a messy situation and people are walking everywhere. And your feet got really dirty in that culture. And so when they would go to someone's house, there normally would be a servant there that would wash the guest's feet. And they were used to that. That was the culture in that day. And so they get to the house where they're having this festival, and they have this meal. And the way they would eat meals is, we have this famous Leonardo da Vinci painting here of the Last Supper. Just so we're clear, this is not accurate. It's super famous, but they didn't get a table for like 22, and then they all sat on one side or anything like that. What they did in that culture was they mainly sat down and kind of in a round. And they wouldn't have chairs. They kind of lean on their side. And so you'd have someone leaning, and your feet would be that way, and you just kind of wrapping around the table that way. And so what would take place is your neighbor's feet is kind of close to your head, which is gross when your feet are covered in dirt and mud and all the other nastiness from just walking around everywhere. And so they're about to sit down and have this meal, but the traditional thing was to get your feet washed because you don't want dirty, smelly, disgusting feet by your buddy's head. That's just gross. But the servant's not here. And the question is, who's going to wash each other's feet? Now, part of the problem with the apostles is they always had this argument with each other about who was the greatest, who was the best among them, who was the smartest, who was the best follower of Jesus, who was the most holy, the most righteous, all those things. They had these arguments over and over and over again, and Jesus would tell them, listen, if you want to be the greatest, you have to be the least. It's about serving. It's not about being the best. He would tell them this over and over and over again, but they never got it because they were focused on themselves. And so they're looking around, probably thinking, who's going to wash my feet? And they're thinking in their own head, not me. Because if they were to lower themselves and wash their buddy's feet, that would just essentially them be admitting that they're just a servant and that they're lower than their friends and they're lower than each other. And they don't want to lower themselves to that point. And so Jesus gets up, puts a towel around his waist, gets some water in a bowl, and he gets down to the people he just spent his entire the last 3.5 years investing in, and he starts washing their feet. And he's wiping off the dirt and the mud and the animal poop or whatever it may be. He's cleaning them. And Peter, he gets it to Peter, and Peter was kind of a loudmouth. He's kind of known as the apostle with the foot-shaped mouth because he just enjoyed sticking his foot in his mouth all the time with the stupid stuff he would say. And so he says to Jesus, are you actually going to wash my feet? And Jesus is like, yeah, you don't know what I'm about to do. He's like, no, you can't wash my feet, Jesus. No way, this is too low for you. Almost as a way for Peter to go, guys, we can't have the leader, Jesus, the Messiah, washing our feet. Come on now, kind of making himself look good by being the one who's verbal about this. And Jesus goes, listen, you don't understand. If I don't wash your feet, you have no part in me. And then Peter's like, whoa, never mind then. You actually wash my feet, wash my hands, wash my head. Do it all, Jesus. I want all of you. This is what I want to be the holiest I can. I want to be the best. And Jesus is like, man, I can just picture Jesus going, oh, gosh, again? And he tells him, listen, you're missing it. You're clean. You don't need your whole body wash. You've had a bath. And what he's saying is, listen, you've already chosen to follow me. You trust me. You've put your life into me. You've been baptized. Like, you are a follower of me. You're clean. But you know what? Even still, you need your feet washed sometimes, but not your whole body. Kind of this symbolism, this reminder, like, hey, as we follow Jesus, yeah, we're saved. We're rescued by him. And we put our trust into him. But hey, we still have baggage. We still have mess ups. And we still need cleaned up sometimes. So Jesus washes his feet. He washes all of his apostles' feet. And he goes around serving them, loving them. He says, this is what it's about. And he continues on in John 13, verses 12 through 17. He says, when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me Lord and teacher and Lord, and rightfully so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is the messenger greater than the one who sent him. And now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. And so Jesus finishes up and then summarizes what all this meant. He is the Savior. He's the Messiah. He is their teacher. He is their Lord. He is their boss. And he lowered himself to wash their feet. He served them. He loved them. And now he told them to go and do the same. To go and serve, to love, to bless, to strengthen each other and those they meet in life. You see, life was not about them. It was about showing the world that God loves them and came to serve them through Jesus, and now they're told to go and do the same. And this moment in Jesus' life is another reminder that life is much bigger than us, especially when it comes to our faith in God. You see, so often we think that God and church, or we think about it on an individualistic level. We ask ourselves, what's in it for me? We think, what do I have to do to make sure I feel better about myself and my standing with God? How do I gain God's favor? And a lot of times that's how we've experienced church. That's how we've experienced our faith. It's just something we've done. That's something I've done. I'm willing to bet that's how a lot of us have done that in this room. And so as a result, it leads to us just trying to follow a bunch of rules and regulations, and our relationship with God becomes this checklist of going to church and trying to be a good person each day, but that becomes old and stale really quickly. We think that God is up there with a checklist looking down thinking, did you go to church this week? Check. Did you say your prayers before dinner? Check. But oh, you became angry at a coworker and cussed them out this week. Not good. Oh, you lost your patience with your spouse and your children. That wasn't very good either, man. And oh, you're still struggling with that problem that you don't want anyone else to know about? Man, that's bad. And we think that's how God's looking down upon us as we're living life and dealing with our own baggage and our struggles and our own sin. And so we feel like we have to live up to this standard that God has, but the problem is none of us can live up to the standard that God set for us. That's why he sent Jesus. And so church then, as a result of that, becomes one of two things, I think. One, it becomes the thing we go to each week as a way to make ourselves feel better. We go, we check it off the list and go, okay, I did it. God's happy with me this week because I went to church this week. Or two, it becomes the thing we start despising because no matter how often we go, no matter how often we've gone to church, we still feel like we can't get out of our own way and that God's just never going to be happy with us. So church becomes a struggle. But I think that's where we miss it. That when we gather together as a church, when we gather together as one church, we're a part of something so much bigger than just ourselves. And yeah, we all struggle, we all have sin, and Jesus comes to rescue us and restore us and to lead us to a better life. That's all about following him and living better together. But we often miss the point when we make it just about us. We look at God, we look at church, we look at faith and think of it just for ourselves. We think of it just as Jesus came to rescue us, which is 100% true. And we need to realize that first and foremost beyond anything else. When we start with God, we start with this faith thing. It starts with God sending Jesus to rescue us, to give us a life that we don't deserve, but through his grace, he's given it to us through his life and death and resurrection. But it doesn't stop there. Jesus also came to restore, and he has now invited us into joining together to be a part of that restoration process. And that's what the church is and supposed to be. That's why we've started One Church, to work as one to help people to follow Jesus. And that's why what we want to do, this is why we started this, and this is what we're inviting you into as we've started this, because together is better. Now, I don't know where you are with your faith and your church background. Some of you maybe you grew up in the church, but you stopped going for a long time, and you decided to check this out, because we sent you a bunch of mailers, whatever that may be. Some of you have no faith or church background, and you're just checking this thing out just to see what this church thing and this God thing is all about. If that's you, I'm so happy you're here and you're exploring that. Some of you are looking for a church where you can belong and explore to figure out how God plays a role in your life. Some of you here may not believe in God at all, but you're curious, and you're wondering, if he exists, what's he want with me? Some of you maybe believe in God, but want to know what it looks like to have him more involved with your life, which I'm sure is a lot of us in this room. And some of you have loved and believed and trusted God and put your faith in Jesus a long time ago, and you just need reminded that there is a life that's bigger than yourself, and God is calling you to something much bigger than just you. And whatever and wherever you may be, it is so important for all of us to know and embrace that God didn't just come to rescue you, he also came to restore you and calls you to help in the restoration process in this world. You see, if the church doesn't look and serve the people in the community around us, then we're not really a church. And maybe that's a new idea for you. Maybe you've never seen or experienced church in that way. Maybe you're missing that point. And the key is we have to embody the example that Jesus set for us by washing his disciples' feet. That's the church we want to be, and that's why we started this thing. If you really want to know what it's like to trust and follow Jesus, then you need to experience living and loving like he did. That's why as a church, we set out to live in a way that washes the feet of people around us, meets their needs. Last week, I told you our first two values of a church that we hold and we try to live out, and they are this. One, church is a place for you to belong, and it's a space for you to explore. These are for you individually. I promised last week, this is a place for you to belong, that you can be a part of, no matter what your background, no matter what your baggage, behaviors, or whatever that may be, you belong here. Even before you believe, as you're figuring this out. And it's a space for you to explore and ask questions, express doubts, and figure out who God is and what he wants with your life through Jesus. This is for you, and we do that together. But it doesn't stop there. We also promise as a church to live out our third value, which is this, that we have a community to serve. We are here to be in and for this Chartiers Valley area, to serve, to love, and to essentially look for ways to wash the feet of the people around us. And over the past year, before we ever launched this thing last week, we've been doing that. We've actually partnered and served with 18 different events in our local community to serve, to love, and essentially try to wash the feet of people around us with the needs that this community has. And we'll continue to do that. In fact, I'm excited to tell you guys about it. It's in your program about one way we're going to do this as an entire church. We've been calling our partnership and the serving in this community for a year now. We've called it Love CV. And I'm really excited to announce that on Sunday, April 29th, we are going to have our first ever Love CV Day. And this is what's going to happen. What's going to happen is instead of meeting here in the auditorium for church together, we're going to do church out in our community. And what we're doing is we're building partnerships, and we're getting projects put together with different organizations in the Chartiers Valley area. And we're going to gather together, we're going to pray, and people are going to sign up for different sites. And then for church that morning, we're going to go be the church and go serve in those areas. And there'll be different projects that are people-based. There'll be some projects that are light labor-based, like some light landscaping type things for community organizations that need that. But for us, if we only met here and didn't do anything out there, we'd be wasting our time, we'd be wasting our money, we'd be wasting our energy. For us, we need to go serve, because that's what the church is supposed to be about. And so that's Sunday the 29th, we're going to go have our Love CV Day. And as a church, we're going to go serve our community. And I want to invite you into joining us in that, to go and serve this local community together. And I'm going to invite you to challenge you to bring other people with you. Bring some neighbors and friends. Say, hey, we're going to go serve and love our community. You should join us in that. Sign-ups for the specific sites will start next week, next Sunday, but I just want you to mark that on your calendar now, April 29th. That's what we're doing, our Love CV Day. It's going to be great. So more information and sign-ups start next week for that. But this is a part of what it looks like to be the church, and I invite you to do that with us together. And not only do we need to serve our community on a corporate level together, it also needs to be lived out on an individual level. That's why our fourth value as a church is this, that we have a life on purpose. Jesus didn't just come to rescue us and then tell us to go to church on Sunday mornings. He calls us to the greatest life that we can have, a life where together is better, where we live for something bigger than ourselves, and Jesus calls us to live a life on purpose with that. And so we look for ways to serve inside these walls and outside these walls together and individually. One of the places that happens is here on Sunday mornings. There are people who show up at this school at 7 a.m. to get all this stuff set up around that you see. They're part of this setup team that says, you know what, we're going to create an environment for people to come and belong and explore. And so to do that, I'm going to get up early. I'm going to bring a big trailer here, and we're going to unload all this stuff and set it up so we can have this church experience together. There are people who get the coffee and refreshments ready. There are people who are in the parking lot, and you saw them today freezing because it's still winter here in Pittsburgh. I'm so sick of it, but it's almost done. But they were out there welcoming and greeting you. They're hanging out outside. There's people inside these lobbies. There's amazing volunteers in the children's wing. There are people here who say, you know what, I'm going to serve everybody else today by doing this. There's people in the back running the sound. There's people playing instruments and singing. This is a way we can live purposely on Sunday mornings together, by serving each other. And you're invited into that too. I promise your understanding and your experience of church and following Jesus and the life that he calls you goes way up when you join in with something like that. So I promise you this. If you come here and you come on Sundays and you start coming for a while, maybe you say, I'm going to give it like 4 or 5 months and just see what this is like, but don't get connected, don't get involved, I can guarantee what's going to happen. You're going to go, you know what, this isn't for me. And you're going to leave. But together is better. The truth in that is this, that we join together by living out the mission of the church together, by serving within these walls or outside these walls. So if you're interested in seeing what it's like to serve, I challenge you to say, hey, you know what, I'll try something out. Fill out that Connect card and just say, I'm interested in volunteering. You don't even have to know what you want to do yet. We can talk with you and figure that out with you. You can say, I'll give this a shot. I can say hi to people and shake their hands as they come in. I can get donuts ready or coffee ready. I can hang out with little kids. I can sing. I can play instruments, whatever that may be. We'll help you find a way to be a part of that. Plus, you don't have to have this whole faith thing figured out to jump in and serve. You can still belong and explore and ask questions while you're setting up and tearing down or serving on a team. In fact, I believe that being a part of this will help you on your journey to know and trust and follow Jesus better, and helps you connect with more people in this room better who are belonging, exploring with you, because together is better. We can live a life on purpose inside these walls, but we can also do it outside these walls. We gather here on Sundays so we can go scatter amongst our own lives to live it out. That means we have an opportunity to live our lives in a way that serves the people around us in every aspect. Whether that is simply loving and serving our spouse and our families, or treating people we come in contact with grace and love, or actually doing acts of service for our local neighbors or the people around us or our coworkers. We have opportunities to live on purpose every single moment of our lives. In fact, one simple way you can serve somebody this week is to invite them to come back with you next week for Easter. We'll have Easter service here, same time, same place, 10 o'clock. And if you know of family and friends that don't have a church connection, invite them to come with you. You see, Easter is actually one of the 2 times a year that people are actually open to checking out a church and seeing what this whole God and Jesus and faith thing is all about. But sometimes all they're waiting for is a simple invite. And you have an opportunity to live on purpose by doing that this week. So I'm going to challenge you, think through who that is. Maybe even write it on your program right now and say, you know what, I'm going to invite this person or these people this week, and pray about that and say, okay, I'm going to go do it. And at the end of the day, this is what we're trying to be about, that we love and serve people around us because of how much Jesus has loved us and served us and rescued us through his death and resurrection. So the one thing I want you to remember, as a reminder, each week we land on the one thing. If you walked away with one thing this week, this is what I want you to remember. It's this, that Jesus rescues us so that we can join the rescue mission. That no matter what your experience of church has been in the past, whether it's been good, bad, or ugly, or non-existent, hopefully today shows you a glimpse of what it can and should be. That even though we don't have it all figured out, even though all of us have turned away from God at some point in our lives, we've all sinned, we've all messed up, that God sent his rescuer, Jesus, to come and save us. Then when we repent and turn from our old lives and go to our new life with Jesus, Jesus gives grace, he gives forgiveness, and he gives new life. And then he then calls us to join this rescue mission by serving the world with the love that he gave us. See, shortly after Jesus washed his disciples' feet, he was arrested and put to death. Now, we're going to talk more about this next week at Easter, obviously, but just spoiler alert, after his death, he came back to life. It's pretty cool. That's actually why we have this whole thing called faith in Jesus in this church, because we trust in that. But then Jesus commissioned his followers to continue his mission that he started of rescue and restoration. And that started shortly after we read what happened in that story in John. In fact, we have the example of what happened in the book of Acts, where it says in chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. This is what took place. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and prayer, kind of like we do here. Everyone was filled with awe and many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. This was the first church. This was the description of what was taking place. You see, the followers of Jesus, the apostles, they finally got it. And lives and communities were being changed, and we need to do the same thing as one church. You see, we didn't start one church just to have Sunday morning services. We started one church to be a church for and in this community, and this is what we're called to do. Now, some of you may be here thinking right now as I'm wrapping up, dude, chill out. I'm just checking this thing out. I'm not really sure what to do with all this. And if that's you, that's awesome. That's completely okay. I want you to keep checking this out. Take as many baby steps as you need to take in this process. But I just want to be honest with you. This is what we started this for. This is why we exist as a church, to be a church. This is what we're trying to accomplish. It's something much bigger than ourselves. It's a call to live a life that God has for us together because together is better. And if we do this, I think the same thing happens that happened in the first church. The first ever church. Lives and communities will be changed. Really amazing things will happen. We'll wash the feet of our community, and we'll be the church that God calls us to. And most importantly, this will happen to some of us in this room and people in this community. People are going to go, you know what? I haven't been living this life that Jesus called me to live. I want to turn from that life and go trust him and follow him in the life he calls me to. Jesus rescues us and restores us. And that's the rescue mission we get to be a part of after we do that. That's why we exist. That's why together is better. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to pray, and the band's going to lead us in a couple of songs to reflect on this, to worship and respond with this. But after a couple of songs, we're going to take communion together. That's something we do every single week. We remember the death and resurrection. Now, last week was a little confusing. Maybe you never saw this before, how it's done. But we have these buckets that are in the front of these sections. And I'm going to encourage you guys to take the buckets, take some communion, and pass those around. I'll come up and I'll lead us in communion together here in a couple of songs. But just so you know, in those packages, there's a little top layer, a small thin layer. You open that layer, that's where the bread is that represents Jesus' body. And there's another layer that opens up to the juice that represents Jesus' blood. But we'll take that together to remember the sacrifice that Jesus made for us. So I'm going to pray. I'm going to encourage you guys to pass that communion back to the rows as we respond and worship God together through song. Let's pray. God, thanks so much for today. And another chance to come. It's our second week, God, as holding public services at church. And we thank you for those who are here in this room and the kids and the volunteers who are in the hallway. But God, we also pray for those who are in this community that maybe don't know you. And maybe for those in this room that don't know you either, and and they're just wondering who you are and what you want with them, God. And God, I pray that they know right now that you just want them because you love them. And you sent Jesus to rescue them, to give them a new life through him. And God, I pray that we can be a church that goes and washes the feet of this community by loving and serving and giving grace and mercy, so they experience the same thing of how much you love them and how much you want their lives to be lives that trust you. So God, help us to be that church. Help us to live out that together is better. We thank you for Jesus, who made this possible through his death, through his resurrection, and the life that he lived. In his name we pray.